I used to think history was boring, you know, dry dates, battles, kings, treaties, and whatever else you could fall asleep to in a textbook. But then I picked up a book, an actual historical book, and it hit me. History isn't about facts, it's about people, and people are messy. They betray each other, fall in love, start wars over pride, and write poetry on the battlefield. They scream, they scheme, they suffer, they survive. It turns out history is just humanity turned up to 11. When you read the right books, you stop seeing history as the past. You start seeing it as a mirror. You realize the people back then weren't different from us. They just wore funnier clothes and didn't have smartphones to record their breakdowns. So in this video, I'm going to share 10 historical books that don't feel like homework. These are the ones that punched me in the gut, that made me feel the weight of empires, the cost of silence, and the quiet rebellion of simply surviving. Some are nonfiction, some are historical fiction. Some are written by people who lived through the worst parts of history and still found a way to write beautifully. Whether you're a student, a skeptic, or just someone trying to understand why the world feels like it's on repeat, these books might give you some clues, or at least some company. Let's begin, not with a modern historian, but with a man who basically invented history as a genre. Herodotus, the original ancient gossip. Herodotus, the world's first historian, and also its first drama queen. If Twitter had existed in ancient Greece, Herodotus would have been trending every week. He's known as the father of history, but let's be honest, he's also the father of spicy storytelling. His book, The Histories, isn't a dry record of names and dates. It's more like a wild travel vlog, mixed with war stories, gossip, ghost tales, and a healthy dose of exaggeration. He tells you about the Persian Wars, sure, but also about gold digging ants in India, Egyptian mummification, and what Scythians do with the skulls of their enemies. They drink out of them, but underneath all that color is something real. Herodotus was trying to understand why civilizations rise and fall, why empires fight, why humans repeat the same mistakes. And even though he wrote in the 5th century BCE, the questions he's asking still sting today. He doesn't pretend to know everything. He literally writes, I am obligated to report what I am told, but I am not obligated to believe it. That line alone makes him more honest than half the media today. Reading the histories feels like sitting down with your most dramatic friend, who also happens to be weirdly wise. You know they're embellishing, but you keep listening because buried in all the drama is a warning, or a pattern, or a truth we haven't outgrown yet. So if you want to start your historical reading with someone who lived thousands of years ago and still somehow gets us, Herodotus is your go-to guy. Next up, a book about the empire that couldn't stop falling. Edward Gibbon, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire and the Long, Slow Burn of Power. Imagine writing a book so massive, so detailed, so brutally clever that even the footnotes have bite. That is Gibbon for you. The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire isn't just a history book. It's an autopsy report on one of the greatest empires in human history. And Edward Gibbon? He's the sharp-tongued pathologist with a dry British wit and zero patience for hypocrisy. The book spans over 1,000 years, from the golden days of Rome to the sackings, splits, and sputterings that eventually turned it into a memory. It's dense, yes, but it's also weirdly entertaining. Gibbon doesn't just tell you what happened. He tells you why it was kinda stupid and why they should have seen it coming. He blames the usual suspects: corruption, decadence, too much religion, too little common sense. But he also paints a picture of how slowly empires unravel. It's not one big explosion, it's a long, quiet rot. Bureaucrats doing nothing, generals getting lazy, citizens forgetting what they were fighting for. You read it and start to wonder, wait, is he talking about Rome or us? Gibbon had this way of making you laugh while also scaring you, like a historian who moonlighted as a stand-up comic. He once wrote, "History is little more than the register of crimes, follies, and misfortunes of mankind." And by the end of this book, you kind of believe him. But here's the thing, Gibbon doesn't despair. He studies decay, not to wallow in it, but to understand it, to figure out what went wrong, so maybe we don't have to repeat it. Spoiler, we probably will. If you want to know what happens when power gets comfortable, when citizens stop caring, and when empires start building statues instead of schools, read Gibbon. C.L.R. James, The Black Jacobins. If history books were scored like films, The Black Jacobins would be a war epic. Think explosions, betrayal, revolution, and the kind of hero that textbooks usually forget to mention. Toussaint Louverture, a formerly enslaved man who outsmarted Europe's mightiest empires. C.L.R. James wasn't just the historian. He was a playwright, a radical, a cricket fan, and a Caribbean intellectual who knew that history isn't just what happened, but who gets to tell it. And in The Black Jacobins, he tells it with fury, grace, and an incredible sense of timing. This book is about the Haitian Revolution, but not the way you learned it, if you learned it at all. It's about enslaved people rising up against French colonial power during the same years that Paris was screaming about liberty and fraternity, while still keeping its colonies chained. James doesn't flinch. He shows the blood, the chaos, the impossible choices. But he also shows the genius of Louverture, who led the first successful slave revolt in modern history and turned Haiti into the first Black Republic. It's wild, it's heartbreaking, it's triumphant, and it feels like the kind of story that should be on every school syllabus, but somehow isn't. What makes this book so powerful is that James isn't neutral. He knows what is at stake. He's not writing history to impress academics. He's writing to make sure we remember, because forgetting revolutions is one of the ways oppression survives. The Black Jacobins is for anyone who wants their history with fire in its belly. It reminds us that history isn't always written by the victors, but sometimes it is reclaimed by the survivors. Next, Marguerite Yourcenar, Memoirs of Hadrian. Some historical novels scream. This one whispers. And somehow, that whisper hits even harder. Memoirs of Hadrian isn't just a novel. It's a farewell letter from an emperor to the world, but it's not pompous or imperial. It's painfully human. It's about power, aging, love, regret, and trying to make sense of it all before you run out of time. Hadrian ruled Rome at its height, when the empire stretched from Britain to the edges of Persia. But in Yourcenar's hands, he's not just a ruler. He's a man sitting in his garden, bones aching, looking back on his life. And what he remembers isn't the battles or the palaces. He remembers the people, the choices, the ones he loved, the ones he lost, and the silence that follows even the loudest victories. Yourcenar spent decades writing this book. She read ancient sources. She studied medicine, architecture, Roman law, just to make sure every line felt real. And it does. The voice she gives Hadrian is so believable, you forget it's fiction. You start hearing your own thoughts in his. His doubts become yours. What is extraordinary is that Memoirs of Hadrian doesn't try to dazzle with drama. There are no sudden twists or sword fights, just quiet wisdom and pain, and this eerie feeling that Hadrian could be any one of us if we were born into power, and then lived long enough to regret it. He says, "I begin to discern the profile of my death." And somehow that line hits harder than any historical fact ever could. This book reminds you that empires fall, but even more than that emperors are just people with bad knees, fading memories, and an aching desire to be understood. Up next, bureaucracy, blunders, and the slow fuse that blew up the world. Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August. Some books explain history. This one warns you. Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August opens with European leaders sleepwalking into disaster. It's the summer of 1914. Everyone is wearing fancy uniforms, making polite speeches, and quietly preparing to murder each other. Within weeks, the world is at war, and nobody seems entirely sure why. Tuchman doesn't write like a traditional historian. She writes like someone telling you a story that should have never happened. She zooms in on the absurdities. Kings and generals more concerned with railway schedules than actual lives. Plans that fall apart by day 2. Diplomats bluffing until the whole continent is on fire. You read this book and start to feel something awful. This all could have been avoided. It wasn't just nationalism or militarism. It was pride. It was paperwork. It was too many people thinking they had more time than they did. And what makes Tuchman so good is that she doesn't need to editorialize. She just shows you the chain of events. One misread telegram, one overconfident speech, one train that arrived late, and then boom, 4 years of trench warfare, 20 million dead, a whole century shaped by a single misstep. John F. Kennedy reportedly read this book during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That is how much of a wake-up call it is. It shows how fragile peace really is. How history doesn't always turn on evil intentions, but on bad timing and worse egos. If you want to understand how the world fell apart in the most preventable way imaginable, read The Guns of August. It won't comfort you, but it might make you listen more carefully the next time history clears its throat. Coming up next, a book that shifts the spotlight from generals to ghosts. D. Brown's Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. Most history books tell the story of expansion. This one tells the story of erasure. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee isn't easy to read, and that is exactly why it matters. D. Brown takes the classic tale of the American West, strips away the Hollywood mythology, and shows it from the perspective we were never taught. The native peoples whose lives, lands, and legacies were slowly and then violently taken away. The book spans from the 1860s to the massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890, where hundreds of Lakota Sioux, including women and children, were killed by US troops. But it's not just about one event. It's about betrayal after betrayal, broken treaties, lies wrapped in diplomacy, forced removals sold as civilization. What makes it so powerful is that Brown steps back. He lets native voices speak through speeches, testimonies, and the words of leaders like Sitting Bull and Chief Joseph. You hear not just the pain, but the clarity. These aren't caricatures of noble savages. They are real people watching their world disappear in slow motion. And Brown, a white American librarian, knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't position himself as a savior or a scholar. He just wanted to show the part of history that had been buried, sometimes literally. You read this book and you start to feel the weight of silence, the weight of stories left out of classrooms. It's not comfortable, but that's the point. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee reminds us that history isn't always written by the victors. It's often written for them, and sometimes we have to go looking for the voices that were silenced, the chapters that were skipped. Next up, A Night Darker Than Most, from one of the 20th century's most necessary witnesses, Elie Wiesel's Night. Some books don't need to be long to leave a mark. Night is barely 120 pages, but it burns through you like a brand. Elie Wiesel was just 15 when he was taken to Auschwitz. He had been a quiet religious boy from a small town in Romania. By the time he left the camps, he was something else, not fully alive, not fully dead, just someone carrying a terrible memory and the responsibility of passing it on. Night isn't a history book in the usual sense. It doesn't chart the rise of fascism or explain the logistics of genocide. It doesn't need to. It simply says, this happened. I was there. This is what I saw, and it should never be forgotten. Wiesel writes with a quiet, cutting simplicity. He doesn't sensationalize. He doesn't ask for pity. He just tells the truth. And somehow, that is more haunting than any dramatic retelling could ever be. There's a scene where Wiesel watches a child hung by the Nazis. The man behind him whispers, "Where is God now?" And Wiesel writes, "Where is he? This is where, hanging here from this gallows." That line hits like a thunderclap. Night is about faith, how it breaks, how it bends, how it limps forward even after being shattered. It's also about silence, the silence of the world that looked away, the silence that followed the screams. Wiesel didn't want to write the book at first. He thought silence might be more respectful, but eventually, he realized that silence is exactly what evil counts on. So he wrote, and thank God he did. If you've ever wondered how to face the worst of humanity without losing your own, read Night. It's short, but nothing about it is small. Next, from the ashes of one fallen empire to the fever dream of another, Orlando Figes's A People's Tragedy. Some revolutions promise freedom. This one promised everything and delivered terror. Orlando Figes's A People's Tragedy is a doorstop of a book, but every page feels necessary. It covers the Russian Revolution, from the twilight of the Romanovs to the rise of Lenin and the green transformation of hope into horror. But this isn't a story about big men and big ideologies. It's a story about people, ordinary Russians, who dreamed of bread and dignity and ended up with famine and fear. teachers, farmers, soldiers, poets. Some believed, some resisted. Most just tried to survive while history stampeded over them. Figes captures the mood of a country slowly going mad. The confusion, the propaganda, the slow erosion of truth. It's a portrait of a society where everything is questioned, then nothing is trusted. Sound familiar? What makes the book so haunting is its humanity. You read diary entries, personal letters, secret notes. You see people caught between old gods and new dogmas. The Caesar is gone, but the boots on your neck are still there, just polished differently. And the tragedy, it's not just that the revolution failed, it's that it succeeded and then became the thing it fought against. Figes writes with clarity, but never coldness. He doesn't point fingers. He lights candles. He shows you the moments where things could have gone another way, but didn't. If you want to understand how revolutions spiral, how hope turns to fear, and how even utopia can become a prison, read A People's Tragedy. And for the final recommendation, a novel where war is everything and nothing, and one man's name becomes a whisper across history. Vasily Grossman, Life and Fate. If Tolstoy had lived through World War II, survived Stalinism, and worked as a war correspondent at the Battle of Stalingrad, he might have written something like Life and Fate, but he didn't. Vasily Grossman did, and it nearly got him erased. This novel is enormous, not just in page count, but in ambition. It wants to show you everything: the front lines, the death camps, the kitchens, the crumbling apartments, the scientists caught between ideology and truth. It reads like a chorus of human voices caught in the machinery of war and politics. Grossman doesn't offer easy heroes. Everyone is compromised. Everyone is tired. Some fight because they believe. Some fight because they are afraid. Some stop believing entirely, but keep going anyway. What makes this book so powerful is that it doesn't just criticize fascism. It turns its gaze on the Soviet Union itself. Grossman dares to say that Stalinism and Nazism are mirror images, both crushing the soul in the name of some imagined purity. That idea got him censored, silenced, and surveilled. The KGB confiscated Life and Fate before it could be published. Grossman died thinking it would never see the light of day. But decades later, a smuggled microfilm reached the West. And now, we read it, knowing that the truth finds its way, even if it has to sneak out one page at a time. There's a line in the book that says, "You can't predict the life of a grain of dust." That is the whole novel in a sentence. History crushes people like dust, but still, somehow, they matter. Life and Fate is a book about the end of illusions, but it's also about the endurance of kindness, of decency, of small, stubborn human goodness that survives in even the darkest times. So why bother with these books? Why dig through the past when the present already feels heavy enough? Because these books don't just tell you what happened. They show you how we got here. They remind you that every age thought itself special, unique, final, and every age was wrong. That the patterns keep coming, and that being awake, being aware, is still our best defense. They make you less naive, but also, strangely, less alone. Because someone else lived through chaos. Someone else saw the collapse. Someone else asked the same questions you're asking now. and wrote them down. Whether it's Herodotus whispering from 2,500 years ago, or Grossman smuggling truth through iron curtains, these books give you a feeling that maybe, just maybe, you're part of something bigger. Not just a reader of history, but a carrier of it. I hope to see you next time.